So here's a recap. Dungeons & Dragons was flying off the shelves, Donald K. died, and Bloom bought more shares of TSR Hobbies Incorporated. Now Gygax owned 35% of TSR Hobbies Incorporated, while Bloom owned most of it, basically giving him control of the company. But in this part, we aren't focusing on the issues between Gygax and Bloom. No, those come later. Today we focus on the issues between Gygax and Arneson. Pen pals turned foes. During 1975 is when Dave Arneson got out of college and officially joined TSR Hobbies as an employee. But here's the thing about Dave Arneson. He had a good head on his shoulders. I'll say that. He thought of leveling up. He thought of a good chunk of the rules that Dungeons & Dragons is based off of. But he was a little lazy when it came to actually writing this stuff down and formatting it into something that TSR Hobbies Incorporated could publish. In 1976, TSR Hobbies Incorporated started releasing The Dragon, which is a magazine that was supposed to replace the newsletter they were making. The point of the magazine was to make sure TSR Hobbies Incorporated kept their loyal fans. They already saw how they killed Gwydden Games, and they didn't want that to happen to them. Say what you want about Gygax, he was a savvy businessman. It was around this time that copycats were popping up and Gygax had to fight for control for the customers. Your typical cease and desists were distributed, and some unimportant lawsuits here and there. TSR Hobbies signed an agreement to start making miniatures for Dungeons & Dragons around this time. Some basic stuff, but why is Arneson such an issue? Well, as I mentioned before, Arneson was a smart cookie, but he never really did his job. Whenever he finished anything, it took a lot of effort to edit and revise and make it into something even remotely worth publishing. Gygax worked several months trying to take the 20 pages Arneson did and get Arneson to make a 50-page draft for the Blackmoor campaign, which you'd think Arneson would be more eager to do since Blackmoor is literally his creation. Arneson's friend Mike Mornard mentioned, what he gave Gary was his handwritten notes for an expanded version of Chainmail, and it looked like shit. When TSR Hobbies was actually trying to produce the Blackmoor supplement, Gygax had to inform the community that it was to be delayed for several months. This went on for so long, he had to apologize to everyone who pre-ordered it. Even when Arneson did finish Blackmoor, it was difficult to read and a lot of it didn't really make much sense. Before it was to be released, it had to be rewritten. In the next year of 1976, Dave Arneson was only credited on 3 TSR products, while Gygax was writing enough to cover for 2 men. Just after 10 months of working for TSR, Arneson left the company. And nobody really said why. Nobody really said if Arneson was fired, or if he left the company by his own will, but we at least know what led up to it. And you'd think that it'd be the end of the story, but let's jump ahead 2 years. 1978, just at the peak of disco, TSR Hobbies was releasing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. You'll hear people talk about different editions of Dungeons & Dragons, so I'll make this simple for you. The first 3 booklets that were released was the original edition. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons had a first edition and then a second edition, and this was a complete overhaul of the rules. The classes were fleshed out, the concept of alignments was introduced, and Gygax was writing it all. He's literally the only author listed on the book. You'd think there wouldn't be an issue with this. It's just more content for the players to enjoy. Well, Gygax was a bit prideful, and he considered Advanced Dungeons & Dragons wholly his own. What you need to understand is that Dave Arneson has been receiving royalties for Dungeons & Dragons because it is also technically his game. Because Gygax considered Advanced Dungeons & Dragons his game, Dave Arneson shouldn't receive royalties because Arneson didn't do anything for it. Of course, Arneson wasn't happy about this. In 1979, Arneson sued for violating contract. There was back and forth. Arneson said that he deserved royalties because Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a derivative of his work. Gygax said it was wholly his own game and tried to get the case dismissed. Eventually, TSR Hobbies Incorporated managed to settle this outside of court, and Arneson would be given 2.5% royalties for the sales of the rulebooks up to $1.2 million, along with royalties from any revised editions. He wouldn't get any credit for the rules, but he was willing to settle with just the money. Now, you'd think Arneson would be happy, but he kept milking that cow. Arneson filed 5 different lawsuits against TSR Hobbies over 30 years. He didn't use the money very wisely? He made his own game publishing company and computer game company that never really went anywhere. He invested in other people's games. In the end, Gygax and Arneson didn't really hate each other, but their friendship was definitely over.